Okay, so welcome to scene 3 of Act 1. So if you think about our map that we've looked at in the last 2 videos and how Forest, where the military camp is right up the top, and Fife, where the battle was taking place, is sort of toward the bottom of Scotland. This next scene happens in some random undisclosed place between the two. So both Macbeth and Banquo have been fighting in the battle quite viciously and bloodily, and they're finished, they won, and now they're making their way up, taking place after Ross and Angus made their way up. And as they're making their way up, they come to a heath, which is a small hill. It's incredibly foggy and dark, murky, creepy weather. You think they're covered in blood, it's foggy, it's gross. And they see 3 disturbing creatures, and they can't even tell if they're human, if they're men or women, and it turns out that these are the 3 witches, and they speak to Macbeth and Banquo, and they make some predictions about their future. So a summary that you might want to write at the start of this scene is: the battle is done, and Macbeth and Banquo come upon the Weird Sisters. They predict that Macbeth will be Thane of Cawdor and king, and that Banquo will father a line of kings. Ross and Angus then come back and bestow Macbeth as Thane of Cawdor. Rundown of characters. This picture will be the first witch. This picture will represent the second witch, or witch number 2. And this is witch number 3. Ross and Angus will reappear in this scene, being sent by Duncan. So I'll be using this picture again. When Ross is speaking, I will zoom in on the shorter one with the longer hair, and when Angus is speaking, I'll zoom in on the taller one wearing black gloves. This picture here will represent Banquo, who is Macbeth's friend and who fought alongside him. And it's important to note his prophecy. So it will be told to him that he will father a line of kings, which was almost like an in-joke for Shakespeare's crowd at the time, because as we remember from our discussions in class, Banquo was the ancestor to King James, and King James, who was the 6th of Scotland and the 1st of England, was the very person this play was written for, and it was performed for him. So Banquo, being his ancestor, is a very important figure in the play. And lastly, this image is going to represent warrior Macbeth. So later, when he is king and when he's going a bit mad, I'll swap this in for different pictures. But right now, when everyone thinks he's the good guy and he's fresh out of the battle, this will be the picture that represents him. So scene 3 takes place on a heath, and there is thunder in the background, and the 3 witches enter. It's important to note that the start of this scene is set up to show us that the witches are violent and that they do harm to others. "Where hast thou been, killing swine?" "Sister, where thou?" "A sailor's wife had chestnuts in her lap, and munched and munched and munched. 'Give me,' quoth I. 'All right thee, witch,' the rump-faced fed Runyon cries. 'Her husband's to a leper gone, master of the tiger, but in a sieve I'll thither sail, and like a rat without a tail, I'll do. I'll give thee a wind, thou'rt kind, and I another. I myself have all the other, and the very ports they blow, all the quarters that they know, i' the shipman's card. I'll drain him dry as hay. Sleep shall neither night nor day hang upon his penthouse lid. He shall live a man forbid. Weary 7 nights, 9 times 9, shall he dwindle, peak, and pine. Though his bark cannot be lost, yet it shall be tempest-tossed. Look what I have." Show me. Here I have a pilot's thumb, wrecked as homeward he did come. A drum, Macbeth doth come. The weird sisters, hand in hand, posters of the sea and land, thus do go about, thrice to thine, and thrice to mine, and thrice again to make up 9. Peace, the charm's wound up. Macbeth and Banquo enter. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. How far is it called for us? What are these? So withered and so wild in their attire, that look not like the inhabitants of the earth, and yet are on it. Live you, or are you aught that man may question? You seem to understand me by each one her choppy finger laying upon her skinny lips. You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so. Speak if you can. What are you?
All hail, Macbeth. Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. All hail, Macbeth. Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor.
All hail, Macbeth. Thou shalt be king hereafter. Lord sir, why do you start and seem to fear things that do sound so fair? To the witches. In the name of truth, are ye fantastical, or that indeed which outwardly ye show? My noble partner you greet with present grace and great prediction of noble having and of royal hope, that he seems rapt withal. To me you speak not. If you can look into the seeds of time, and say which grain will grow and which will not, speak then to me, who neither beg nor fear your favours nor your hate.
Hail, hail.
Hail.
Better than Macbeth and greater. Not so happy, yet much happier.
Thou shalt get kings, though thou be none.
So all hail Macbeth and Banquo. Banquo and Macbeth, all hail.
Stay, you imperfect speakers, tell me more. By Sinel's death, I know I am Thane of Cawdor, but how of Cawdor? The Thane of Cawdor lives, a prosperous gentleman, and to be king stands not within the prospect of belief, no more than to be Cawdor. Say from whence you owe this strange intelligence, or why, upon this blasted heath, you stop our way with such prophetic greetings. Speak, I charge you.
The witches vanish.
Earth hath bubbles, as the water has, and these are of them. Whither are they vanished? Into the air, and what seemed corporal, melted as breath into the wind. Would they have stayed? Were such things here as we do speak about, or have we eaten the insane root that takes the reason prisoner? Your children shall be kings. You shall be a king. And Thane of Cawdor too, went it not so? To the self-same tune and words, who's here? Enter Ross and Angus. The king hath happily received, Macbeth, the news of thy success, and when he reads thy personal venture in the rebels' fight, his wonders and his praises do contend which should be thine or his. Silenced with that, in viewing o'er the rest of the self-same day, he finds thee in stout Norwegian ranks, nothing afeard of what thyself didst make. Strange images of death, as thick as tale, can post with post, and every one did bear thy praises in his kingdom's great defence, and poured them down before him.
We are sent to give thee from our royal master thanks, only to herald thee into his sight, not pay thee.
And, for an earnest of a greater honour, he bade me, from him, call thee Thane of Cawdor, in which addition, hail, most worthy Thane, for it is thine.
What? Can the devil speak true?
The Thane of Cawdor lives. Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?
Who was the Thane lives yet, but under heavy judgment bears that life. which he deserves to lose, whether he was combined with those of Norway, or did line the rebel with hidden help and vantage, or that with both he laboured in his country's wrack, I know not, but treason's capital, confessed and proved, have overthrown him.
Glamis and Thane of Cawdor, the greatest is behind.
Thank you for your pains.
Do you not hope your children shall be kings, when those that gave the chance of Cawdor to me promised no less to them? That trusted home might yet enkindle you to the crown, besides the Thane of Cawdor, but 'tis strange, and oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles to betrays in deepest consequence.
Cousins, a word, I pray you.
Two truths are told, as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme.
I thank you, gentlemen.
This supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. If ill, why hath it given me an earnest of success, commencing in a truth? I am Thane of Cawdor. If good, why do I yield to that suggestion whose horrid image doth unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs? Against the use of nature, present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thoughts, whose murder is yet but fantastical, shake so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not.
Look how our partner's rapt.
Chance will have me king. Why, chance may crown me without my stir.
New honours come upon him, like our strange garments, cleave not their mould, but with the aid of use.
Come what may, time and the hour runs through the roughest day.
Bloody Macbeth, we stay upon your leisure.
Give me your favour. My dull brain was wrought with things forgotten. Kind gentlemen, your pains are registered where every day I turn the leaf to read them. Let us toward the king. Think upon what hath chanced, and, at more time, the interim having weighed it, let us speak our free hearts to each other.
Very gladly.
Till then, enough. Come, friends. Okay, so we just got through one of the longest scenes in the play, so I'm going to work through the themes and vocabulary very quickly. So if you turn back to page 10 in your books, we're going to go down to line 8. So when the first witch is talking, and this is really set up to show how violent and powerful they are, and it's also in reference to a real life event. So if you remember our discussions in class, you'll remember that King James, who was the king at the time this play was performed, had just been in power for a few years, and one of the first things he did when he became king was he married Queen Anne of Denmark. And on their way back from Denmark, when she was coming to be coronated, they hit a massive storm, and King James believed fully that the witches had caused this, the real witches that he believed lived in Scotland and England. So this is a reference to him. So around line 7 and 8, the witch talks about a woman who was eating chestnuts and wouldn't give her any. And they say that her husband's gone to Aleppo, which is Syria, on a ship called the Tiger. And all the way down through to line 15, the witches talk about giving her winds, and they're going to create a storm. And they mention that they're not able to sink the bark on the next page, on page 12. On line 24, they say his bark cannot be lost, and that's a reference to the ship. So just like King James's ship, they say it cannot be sunk, but we will make sure it's tempest tossed, which is a reference to the waves tossing it about. As we go down, the next most important word is at line 32, when all the witches are talking together, and they refer to themselves as the Weird Sisters. And this is an important word, weird. It's in reference to an old English word that was actually spelt W-Y-R-D. And this word refers to the fates. which are powerful goddesses of destiny. So they're powerful beings who people in Shakespeare's time would have understood are able to tell the future. And certainly someone as educated as King James knew who the Weird Sisters were and that they're able to tell the future. So that's an important thing to circle, the word Weird Sisters, and we will come back to that in activities and essay questions. If we go down at line 39, when Macbeth speaks, he says, "So foul and fair a day I have not seen." So it's important to highlight this line because this line mirrors what the witches say in scene 1. It is still raining like they prophesied, and Macbeth has successfully won the battle. So here's this idea of oxymorons coming back in. So the battle lost and won, and something being fair and foul. If we keep going down, they're talking about heading up to Forest, which we already understand. If we go down to, they've got the description of the witches there, which you could highlight that because you could come back to that. But our next note will be on line 46 to 47, where Banquo says, "You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so." So he's basically describing that the witches are hideous and, more importantly, unnatural. So we're going to turn to page 14 now, when the first, second, and third witch greet Macbeth. And these 3 lines are incredibly quotable, so it's an incredibly easy quote to remember and use in a lot of different essays. So we remember Thane of Thane of Cawdor, and shalt be king hereafter. And just like the 3 fates theme that's mentioned on the previous page, these 3 greetings represent the past, Thane of which Macbeth became that when his father Sinel died. Thane of Glamis, the past, he's already been Thane of Glamis. Thane of Cawdor is the present because King Duncan has probably presently at this very second made that decision that he will be Thane of Cawdor now, that Cawdor is being executed for treason, and shalt be king hereafter represents the future. So if you can see, what I've done here, if I can get it into view, is I've highlighted those 3 lines, and I've labeled them past, present, and future. And that's just an easy way to understand it. If we go down further, when Banquo's speaking, he says that Macbeth starts and seems to fear. So he's describing for the audience now how Macbeth's acting. So Macbeth doesn't speak, but we can imagine that he's going, and he's afraid. And Banquo mentions things that do sound so fair. So this is showing us that Macbeth is immediately uneasy at the suggestion of being a king. And there's a couple of things that suggest that before this encounter, he was already thinking about ways to become king. His ambition already existed, and that he may have already planned with Lady Macbeth earlier, before this play began, a way to murder Duncan. And that's very subtle, and not everyone agrees with that. But the idea that he's immediately uneasy seems to suggest that. When we continue down, you see line 55 on the edge of your page. So we're going 2 under that to line 57. And Banquo is talking to the witches, and he uses the phrase of noble having and of royal hope. So that's how he sees Macbeth's prediction. Underneath, he uses the phrase wrapped with all to describe Macbeth. So that's another quote about Macbeth's reaction, and that just means he's enraptured. So if you've ever used the phrase, "Oh, I'm wrapped," or just wrapped with that party that you threw me on the weekend, that's a similar meaning. So wrapped with all means that he's enraptured with this thing, which means he cannot speak, he cannot act. Another very obscure thing that I've written in my book and that you might want to take note of is that as the witches greet Macbeth, they're using nouns rather than verbs. So basically they're putting titles onto him. So Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, King Hereafter. They're greeting him with titles. He's not telling him, "Oh, you will kill Duncan, you will do this." They're just giving him a title, and without saying anything more, they're putting that idea in his head, the idea of murder. We're going toward the bottom of the page, so lines 68 to 69, where they say, All hail Macbeth and Banquo. I've just noted that Banquo's children will take the throne, and we know that's predicted in Shakespeare's real life through King James. On page 16, so we're on the next page now, Macbeth calls the witches imperfect speakers, and imperfect here means unclear. So they have only given him titles and they haven't told him what he needs to do to become king. So they could mean sit back and wait. Duncan's going to give you the crown. He's going to make you heir rather than his son. It could mean that Duncan's about to die of an illness and so are his sons and you'll just get the throne by chance. Or it could mean what Macbeth king, which is you have to kill the king if you want to be the king yourself. Underneath that, Macbeth mentions by Sinel's death, which I've mentioned a couple of times, but you could circle that now. Sinel is his father. So now we know that his father is dead, and that's how he inherited Inverness, his castle, which we'll see in the upcoming scenes, and also became Thane, which is a type of Scottish lord of Glamis. As we keep going down, so we can see along the side of the page, line 80, we'll go down to line 82, and Macbeth's speaking again. He says that the witches vanished into the air, and what seemed corporal. So corporal there means solid. If we go down on Banquo, he introduces a very important theme that won't become really strong until Act 2. And that is the theme of insanity. And this will be probably, I could argue, the strongest theme throughout Macbeth. So insanity will descend upon both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth in varying ways, but ultimately lead to the same end. So I'd suggest you highlight this phrase, this line, where it says, "Have we eaten the insane root that takes the reason prisoner?" And I would say that this introduces the theme of madness. Moving on, page 18, we go down to line 95. Ross has arrived at this point, and he says that the king was silenced with that in viewing o'er the rest of the self-same day. So he's referring to Duncan, and he's saying that Duncan was left speechless, not knowing whether to speak in amazement or praise Macbeth's deeds. So one of the first things Ross wants to tell Macbeth is the king is very happy with you. You've done well. And then, of course, Ross and Angus tell him you're now Thane of Cawdor. And Macbeth, unlike when he hears the witch's prophecy, is immediately very skeptical and uncomfortable. And on line 110, he says, "Why do you dress me in borrowed robes?" So I would do a big star here, and this is one of the first recurring images, the idea of clothing. And Macbeth constantly uses the metaphor of being in ill-fitting clothing or a crown that doesn't fit his head to describe that he doesn't feel like he's earned or deserves the positions that he gets. And indeed, the suggestion of the play is that he doesn't, because he used murder to get them. And on page 20 now, so we'll turn the page, something very interesting starts happening. If you look at the stage directions down this page and the next, you'll see in brackets the italicized word "aside." And that means that Macbeth's not talking to the other characters on stage. He probably has withdrawn himself, and he's speaking quietly, possibly in a whisper, to himself. And this is important because this stage direction shows the two-facedness, or that theme that I mentioned in scene 1 of appearance versus reality. So the idea that what's really going in Macbeth's mind is kept hidden from the other characters, and he's presenting something different to the reality of everybody else. On this same page, on page 20, when Banquo's talking on line 123, he uses the word enkindle, which is an old word meaning to fire or raise up your hopes or fire up your hopes. And And underneath this, in the same phrase, is a very important message. So Banquo is presented as incredibly clever because he thinks of something that Macbeth doesn't. So Macbeth instantly thinks the witches must have told truth because I'm Cawdor, and the witches must be someone who I can trust because they brought about this really good thing. Now I'm Thane of Cawdor. But Banquo says, hold up, don't trust that. He says sometimes evil things, so the instruments of darkness is the phrase he used, tell us some truth. So they'll tell us a little bit of truth to win us over, and then they'll betray us with deepest consequence. So his message there is, just because one thing the witches told you turned out true, don't necessarily listen to them because it could turn out badly for you. But Macbeth completely ignores this, and underneath, on line 130, he says that these are happy prologues leading to the swelling act. So if we think of a book, a prologue is the bit that comes before the main story or the main part of a play, which is the sort of meta reference being used here. He's basically saying that something great is yet to come. So he fully believes at this point he will become king, and that will only be a good thing. So just to summarize this bit here, Macbeth is starting to hide his true feelings from his friend, and he intends to become king. If we go across to page 22, we see that Macbeth is already thinking of murder. And the very first line on this page is, "My thought whose murder yet is but fantastical." So he's basically saying that even though it's a fantasy right now, the idea of murder is shaking me up. It's in my head. But he's sort of trying to tell himself, oh, I'm not going to do it. There's other options right now. So some words to pick out is, it says, "Shake so my single state of man," which means that state of man is referring to like a harmonious state of man, like the state a man is supposed to be in. So it's shaking him up. And it says that function is smothered in surmise. So surmise is thinking. So thinking is sort of smothering him. The thoughts that he's having are smothering him. But he's reassuring himself here. He says, "And nothing is but what is not." And he's basically saying that he won't let his ambition go any further. So, you know, it's not happened yet. I can stop it. It's not happened yet. Then he starts talking to himself again, and he says, "Chance may crown me." And that would be an important line for you to highlight, because you might want to argue later on that the events that are to come, so the murders that Macbeth commits, you might want to argue that someone else caused him to do it. You might want to argue that Lady Macbeth caused him to do it. You might want to argue that the witches caused him to do it, or even something greater like Hecate, who we see later on, or Hecate is how she's pronounced in the play. So this might be a good line for you to use. So he's saying, "Why, chance may crown me without my stir." So he's saying if I let things be, I might become king without having to do anything. And so here he's really struggling with his ambition, and he's really saying that maybe fate will lead him to be king without him needing to kill Duncan. So we see a good side of him here, arguably. We hear, again, another reference to the clothing imagery that you could highlight, where Banquo says, "Like our strange garments cleave not to their molds." So that's that imagery that he has to get used to his achievements and his rewards, just like we have to get used to new clothes. And then Macbeth says the phrase, "Come what may," and he says, "Time and hour runs through the roughest day," and that means that even rough days come to an end. So again, he's soothing himself. And that's where I will leave scene 3. So keep in tune. We'll go through scene 4 in the next video, and then you should be able to fill in your booklet and do the activities.